about an equal number of airlines around the world in senior positions, running the commercials. So an extremely experienced moderator to lead us through this panel, which is the market dynamics of India and South Asia. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Willie Walter, who's now a consultant available for hire. It's expensive though, I suppose. But Willie, please come up here. And I'm going to hand over to Willie to manage this great panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Great. Right, well, this afternoon's panel is about the policy environment that underpins aviation's growth in India. And I think that it's relevant to everybody here. As we heard this morning from Campbell and Peter, it is an ecosystem. The growth of the airlines directly impacts on the growth of the MROs, the growth of flight training academies, growth of headhunters in India, aviation headhunters. There are one or two here, I know. The growth of aviation journalism and so on. But it's all underpinned by really the number of aircraft that are coming in. And what is important there is what is the policy behind those airplanes coming in, particularly in the international environment. And to discuss that, we've got a really stellar panel this afternoon. All three gentlemen I've worked with in one way or the other over my long career. And first of all, I'll introduce Abhijit Dasgupta, who is Head of Planning and Revenue Management at Indigo. Welcome, Abhijit. Abhijit actually was the first ever management trainee at Jet Airways back in 2000? Yeah. 2002. Graduated from Delhi University, I think. Yeah. And he's been absorbed in aviation since then. I first came across Abhijit actually when I was at Etihad, and we did the infamous Etihad Jet Airways deal, where Etihad took 24% of Jet Airways, and in return got 40,000 seats, I think it was, between Abu Dhabi and India, something like that. Anyway, a long time ago, that's where I first came across Abhijit. And if anyone here doesn't know, in an airline, the two big profit levers that you have are network planning, fleet planning, and revenue management. And under Abhijit, he has the whole planning function and he has revenue management, and he's a master of both. So I think we're going to hear a lot from him this afternoon. Secondly, I'll take Stephen Greenway, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Flyer. Stephen and I actually worked together in 2003, I think it was 2-3, back in Virgin Atlantic in the UK. Stephen's had, like me, quite a varied career, very successful career. He was in a number of airlines, including Scoot. Singapore Airlines is a low-cost subsidiary in Singapore. He was Chief Commercial Officer then. He then went on to WestJet, and they appointed him actually to run their ultra-low-cost carrier called Swoop. I thought I was going to confuse the two, Scoot and Swoop. But since then, he's also worked through the ecosystem in projects around not just airlines, but and startup airlines, but also around immigration in particular, I think, and security at airports. So he understands a lot about the policy and regulation of those areas. So again, I think he's got a lot to contribute to this debate this afternoon. And then finally, Sandeep Dal, who runs the US India Aviation Council, I think it's called. Has been program director for the last, it's up there, isn't it? Sorry, cooperation program, yes. For the last 7 years, we've been involved in that. But little or lesser known perhaps, for the last 7 years, he's also been teaching in China, teaching aviation economics and strategy at a university in China. So Sandeep and I first bonded over a trip into China. We went to a conference in Kunming, and that's where we first got to know each other. So he's very well experienced, and we're going to talk a bit about China a bit later, because I believe that India-China nexus is so important for aviation, of course for the world in general, but particularly for aviation. And I think as Billy was described this morning, their Indigo are starting back into China this Sunday, and it's a very key market. So, but Sandeep's also been involved in a lot of other policy issues, works with the Indian government from time to time, and again has a very good perspective on these issues. I think what we'll start with maybe is just a little recap of some of the themes that we talked about this morning, and we heard the CEOs talk about, and also the other luminaries in aviation in India. Obviously, you heard from Airbus, Boeing, PMRO, network, and so on. This issue of market demand. There's a sort of rule of thumb in aviation and airlines. There's a rule of thumb that if you have GDP growth, then your airlines grow in that particular country at something between 1.5 and 2 times GDP growth. So in India, where you have GDP growth, in fact, when I was here a few years back, where you have GDP growth of 7 or 8%, you can realistically expect your aviation demand to grow by 15 or 16%. And GDP growth is interesting because it sort of works in a circle. And I always like to think of Dubai. In Dubai, which, as you know, is a huge airline and a huge sort of aviation base, about 30% of Dubai's GDP is actually driven by Emirates and the airline and the hotels and tourism demand, etc. Now, Dubai is an unusual case because it is a relatively small economy and so on, and 30% of it is driven by aviation. And equally, if aviation is doing well, then it improves the GDP. And when the GDP increases, they need more aviation. So, it's a circular relationship. So, with India in mind, as I say, we're getting 7 or 8% GDP growth. You would expect your airlines to be growing at 15 or 16%. But is that really happening? And is the market demand there? And particularly with the international side being grown by both Air India and Indigo, a lot of orders and so on. That's what I'm going to ask now first. And to open the batting this afternoon, who better than Abhijit?
Who better than someone who never plays cricket? So thanks for having me, Billy. And historically, if you look at the last, I want to say 2 decades in India, the market in the long term has kind of tracked to that number, roughly 1.6 to 2x of GDP growth. Some years, of course, have been higher, some years have been lower, essentially paced by capacity, but in the long term, we have tracked to that. We don't see any reason why the market should not continue to track to that kind of a metric. Again, in the long term, there will be interim ups and downs, largely influenced by capacity, sometimes influenced by external events, but this market is quite resilient. Even the recovery from COVID was just so strong, and that kind of defines or shows us how resilient growth is. I think what we are going through now is that domestic has kind of settled into that kind of a cadence, but we are seeing a little bit of an inflection in international, especially near international flying. and there are a lot of underlying dynamics that are changing, demand dynamics that are changing in the international space. Historically, India's international demand has always been driven largely by Indian settled abroad, right? People coming home to visit what we call BFR, visit families and relatives. And of course, the next big driver has been outbound, what we call one-way traffic. People, Indians going abroad to either work or study or whatever the case may be. So those have been sort of the classical drivers of demand. At least in the sort of near international market, which is, say, 6 hours radius, what we are seeing now is that there is a very large number of Indians that have reached, the right sort of income strata to consume outbound international travel for leisure. So we're seeing this major inflection that is happening, particularly since COVID, where there's this new sort of part of the market is really starting to travel abroad rather than travel, or rather complementing their travel within India, because frankly, it's not like domestic tourism has fallen off. And that's, enabled by a lot of different things. Visa regimes being relaxed in many countries have really been an important enabler for this travel demand. Pricing, of course, as pricing becomes, I won't say more of rational, but just more affordable for more people. There's just very big inflections you see in appetite. And whether it is Thailand or West Asia, Indonesia, we have started operations recently into secondary markets in Malaysia. Across the board, we are seeing a lot of appetite for regional international travel. Thankfully, we have a fleet pipeline to really service that extensively. And then gradually we'll start seeing that spill over into longer and longer lengths of haul. At the same time, there are still a lot of sections of the portions of the market that are heavily underserved or under-tapped. Inbound tourism, for example, is a massive, for a country of this kind of geographic, cultural, ethnic, culinary diversity, we're just scratching the surface on what inbound tourism can create. And that has its own sort of, as you mentioned, multiplier effects on primary and secondary industries. So I think our fleet order speaks for itself that we are quite bullish about this market in the long run. And frankly, we don't see any long-term drivers or long-term indicators that we're going to see any material slowdown in this appetite for travel.
Right, because there's an astonishing number of airplanes, right, on board.
Yeah. It's as a network planner, it gives you a lot of sleepless nights. But thankfully, the demand in the market has been very supportive.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Sandeep, maybe you can comment from a North America sort of point of view, because I know you've worked for a number of those airlines, Delta, Northwest in the past. How do they view the sort of Indian market right now?
Thank you, Billy, and thank you, Mark, for inviting me here. Abhijit has a great point, where India market is huge, but when you look at it, especially to US market, which is a very long haul compared from India, North America market is in a unique position itself. It's a huge market, number one marketplace in the world. It has a lot of industries there, a lot of travelers from India to US and US to India. They come. Big population. The VFR traffic is also to a number that you just can't count on a single plane easily. So the demand and the market size of US is huge, and US is also in a good position in a way. India is catching up as it becomes number 3 marketplace in the world. US is number 1 for a long time. Right? One airline in US will probably have the number of planes that the whole India has. right? So just recently, American Airlines announced 1,000th plane, right? The 1,000th fleet plane. So there's a lot of more to learn from US what is happening, but at the same time, when you look at the traffic between the two countries, it's growing. Earlier, before COVID, most of the traffic would go via third country. But I think what Campbell was saying, or what Air India got niche into, the first thing they did was capture that marketplace. Where, because Abhijit is very sharp in getting all this, the 6-hour radius, so Air India start looking into that. So I can't tell you the numbers, but you can see most of the flights of Air India are full. Currently, because of the issue in between Russia and Ukraine, not many US carriers are coming. But before the war, United has 5 flights a day, non-stop into India. American Airlines has double daily. Delta launched one in Mumbai, and then Air India basically has 6 destinations into US. So the market is there.
Right.
And US market is a little bit, I wouldn't say it's tough to get into. There's a lot of competition because India is an outbound big marketplace, and then we compete with the markets which doesn't have much domestic sectors, right? So they all look at India to grab all the customers to fly into or take them to US or Europe. So those challenges will still be there.
And Stephen, you're going to be depending on this market demand. I think you had a very well-timed interview this morning in the Hindu. Jagriti's here somewhere. Very interesting. You're looking at 4 or 5 points in India. Maybe you'd like to expand on that.
Yeah, so the lens we look through obviously is Saudi Arabia, India, slightly different market than what we're talking about in terms of North America. Predominantly inbound into the kingdom. There are 3 million Indians in Saudi Arabia, everyone from a doctor to a street cleaner, you name it. The VFR traffic that comes back, so they come back at least once a year or every 2 years. And we have the religious pilgrimage traffic coming into Jeddah as well, which is significant. There's a lot of attention about Hajj, but Hajj is a very short amount of time and very restricted. It's more Umrah, which now goes all year round. That segment is booming as well. And I think if you just take a step back, just have a look at the numbers. Saudi Arabia and India both are in the top 5 in terms of trading partners between our countries, number 1. Number 2, we've both had a history of weak national carriers and so forth. That is changing dramatically, particularly in the past decade. Obviously, the onset of Indigo in the past 20 years as well. Saudi has got their act together in the past 10 years, is truly going premium and stabilising. You have Riyadh Air coming online, you have us, etc., etc. And I think our mission, both countries look at it in the same view, and this has come up in the interviews that I've done around this conference, is that for too long a third-party airline has come in and poached both our respective countries' traffic. And we want our fair share. They're not going to disappear, but we want our fair share. I find it the argument about the US and so forth going over Dubai and so forth, I sort of get that considering we're only 4 or 5 hours apart and people are still coming via somewhere. Yes. So there's an excellent opportunity there to crack that open. So we're coming into the market in Q1 of next year. Effectively 2 things: labourers, so bringing labour traffic into the kingdom, again, high volume, low yield, and pilgrims, both for Hajj and Umrah, but particularly Umrah because it's all year round. That's really our 2 targets. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is changing quite dramatically and welcoming. We talked about inbound tourism to India. I'll talk about inbound tourism to Saudi Arabia. That, I think, is probably like India, a bit of a slower boil. We've got to present our credentials. We've got to get all the big projects like the Red Sea resorts coming online. They're all coming online over the next couple of years. I anticipate it's, as I said, it's going to be particularly from India, it's going to be the pilgrims, it's going to be the labour traffic. I think where the leisure is going to come from is, think about it, if you're Roman Catholic, you go to Rome, see the Pope, and then you go to Milan to go shopping. I know it's a bad example, but if you're going to Jeddah, you'll do your pilgrimage, and then you might actually take the opportunity to look around Saudi Arabia. And I think so the first elements of leisure from India are going to be pilgrims coming over, doing their pilgrimage, and then electing to stay and potentially go on to one of the theme resorts that we're starting, or Red Sea, or whatever the case may be, and staying for an extra couple of days. Wherein previously it was very strict and very tight. You came into the kingdom, you did 3 days, and you left. You had to leave, and it was tour operator controlled and very strictly visa controlled. So that's what we're seeing, but I think predominantly, at least in the interim, it's going to be that pilgrim traffic and that labour traffic that we're stimulating and bringing into the kingdom. As opposed to coming into India, particularly for leisure, I think it's got a way to go in terms of convincing Saudis that this is the destination they want to go to for a holiday, be it Goa or whatever the case may be. That case needs to be made, just as the case needs to be made for Indians to come and visit Saudi Arabia on a leisure capacity.
Yes, and I think the development of the Saudi sort of inbound tourism is a lesson to many countries, actually. The amount of money that Saudi Arabia is putting into its inbound tourism.
But
It's astonishing.
what I will always say is, you mentioned Dubai. I mean, Dubai wasn't an overnight success. Okay, I worked for Emirates as a consultant many years ago. I think it was at the time 95% of the traffic was connection.
Yeah.
I got off an A380 a couple of months ago from London, sat there where literally baggage haul this way, transit this way. I probably counted 80% of their traffic was getting off.
Right.
Which is quite
It
prevailing.
has changed.
Yeah, life has changed, but that inbound tourism piece, it will take time. And again, that's why I think it's going to be linked to the pilgrimage, because they're already in kingdom, and it's very easy then to say, let's go to the Red Sea resort, let's go to whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
The other item I was going to say that you said at the start, the factor of two, the domestic growth in the kingdom is about 15-16% at the moment. So
Right.
I think the calculation is that, plus you need to take in the immaturity of the market. So the factor for us versus GDP is probably 3 or 4 at the moment, simply because we're paying catch up
Right.
with the rest of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, we talked a little bit about Dubai. Let's talk a bit more about it. Because when you look at the policy underpinning aviation in India, you get Sir Tim Clark coming every few months or so to complain that there's not more access to India. I just thought I'd get the views of the panel on those complaints. I mean, are they justified, or what should the government be doing? Abhijit, maybe you can kick off.
Well, you'll have to ask the government. We have our opinions about these things. We are engaged with the government. In some cases, the bilaterals are constrained from both sides. In some cases, they're still imbalanced in terms of usage. But by and large, to the points I was making earlier, I don't think we are finding that to be, as Indigo, we are finding that to be our major stopping point for expansion. There is opportunity in multiple directions. And I think that's the encouraging part of this last 3-4 years, that this appetite for outbound consumption isn't pointed towards just the classical destinations, right? It's more democratic in its shape. So as a result, bilaterals have not become a constraint for us. And there are, from a policy perspective, of course, there will be other things to weigh when you start looking at bilateral expansion. And we're engaged with the government on that. But over a period of time, I frankly, as a planning problem, bilaterals are not my major constraint. The other point I want to make about the ecosystem of bilaterals in general, taking the sort of focus away from just one country and just looking at it in a wider lens. I think bilaterals are an enabling provision for growth, right? They are not everything about growth. And bilaterals are built on the principles of balance of benefits, right? Yeah, balance of benefits, right? Okay, whatever is available to airlines on both sides. So both countries are able to benefit from that. Customers are able to benefit from that. And balance of benefits can get influenced with things that are more than just traffic lights, right? So in many places, for example, infrastructure becomes a challenge. India is such a large country that you have so many bilaterals where India offers different points of access, whereas the other country only has one. And that one point of access is infrastructure challenge, has struggle to get slots. Sometimes you struggle to get slots at the right times of day sometimes. And that kind of negates or mitigates or reduces the value of balance of benefits that those bilaterals represent. So, overall there's a larger ecosystem at play that needs to sort of evolve together. But specifically about bilaterals, yes, incrementally we will continue to see growth. Indonesia has recently grown, Thailand has recently grown, Kuwait has recently grown. So as there is enough merit seen from both sides, saying hey, there is enough balance of benefits to be had for both sides to add more capacity to bilateral, it will grow in quickly.
Right. Sandeep, the US as well.
It is, yeah. No, Abhijit's point is correct. When you look at bilaterals, they are trying to look at reciprocity between the countries. The bilaterals are originally, when they were designed, they were designed so that there's free movement of people. Right? That's where it started from. In today's world, bilaterals are taken for granted for trade negotiation, taken for granted for political purposes, and whatnot. Right? Specific to US, India has open skies. Open skies for all of you is basically gives each country right to fly as many destinations or as many times into each other country. It gives you rights to as many carriers of the country's carriers can fly as many times they want. So there's no restriction on capacity, on demand, and other things. But as Campbell, probably if you heard Campbell mention, you get the rights, but if there's no infrastructure, as Abhijit said, in one city, and then you get stuck. So if you don't have access to an airport slot or a gate, then even you have a bilateral access, then you get stuck. Luckily, with India and US, both are large countries, and our demographic is like this. We have 5 or 6 cities that can easily have a US service, right? You look at Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore. These 5, 6 cities big enough to have a non-stop flight. And same in US, right? US is so widespread, and especially Indians are everywhere in US, right? You can actually go to Denver, and you will find more Indians there than in some of the cities in India. So what I want to say is the bilaterals between, so US has this very good system of open skies, and probably the only country in the world which has almost 125 countries under the open skies agreement. India only a handful of countries with the open skies. And then besides open sky, US also have what we call MITAR, which is a multilateral air services agreement, is to grow the so like, for example, is to grow the air services between two countries. So this was an example that I always use when I was in Air New Zealand. New Zealand and US has MITAR. So what does it do is, the US understand that New Zealand is a small country. They might not have, if we put open skies, all the US carriers will just go and bombard and take all the traffic into or out of New Zealand. So they said, no, we wanted to create this program where they wanted to encourage even the local carrier from New Zealand to go. So they have also done this with Singapore Airlines. And the Singapore is a great example. The US is gigantic, right? And then you are saying to open skies to Singapore, that means all the US carriers can just come and bombard capacity into there. So they also developed the same program. So US is very pragmatic, looking at a way where we can help both countries' people-to-people exchanges, but at the same time making sure both countries' airlines also benefit. Of course, they are very open about competition, right?
Right.
The US encourages competition, the government just says, go compete. But I want to tell you something, it's not that easy even though they are open skies, and Willie probably knows that you can get access easily. DOT has a very stringent process about allocating the rights to fly.
Yeah. Talking of allocating rights to fly, this is maybe a little bit of a kind of, I wouldn't say academic, but it's an important point, that once you agree the bilaterals between the two countries, once the bilateral air services agreement is there on each side, then each government has to decide which airlines are going to take advantage or going to be allowed to take advantage of that bilateral. And India is reaching a very interesting point, it seems to me, where the bilaterals, as Andy's commented and Sandeep as well, the bilaterals are becoming relatively available. But India has now got two very substantial international carriers in the shape of Air India and Indigo. They've also got Akasa and SpiceJet also operating international services. How does India divide up the bilateral between those carriers? And as I say, it's maybe a point that not many people appreciate, but it's quite an important point for the airlines involved. And perhaps I'll ask actually Sandy to describe the way the Americans do it, because I think it's quite interesting.
No, thank you, Willie. So the bilaterals, as I said, they get very, it's a significant issues for airlines to operate. They do a lot of capital investment, buying these planes and building up network, and then thinking that they have the right to fly. So what US does is, US has a very defined process of allocating those rights to different airlines. Of course, it's open skies, but then there are restricted. So Japan and US, for the case, I'll give you an example of Japan and US. It's open skies, anyone can fly as many times, but Haneda Airport is restricted airport from Japanese side, because they say we can only, it's open skies, but we can only give so many slots into Haneda. So now how US government will decide, because all the US carriers wants to fly into Japan or into Haneda, which is in the city, Tokyo. So, and then you have Delta, American, you have United, you have Alaska, you have Hawaiian, they all want to fly into, and then there's restricted. So what US does is this, each of the airline, if there's a route opens in between Seattle and Haneda, they have all the airlines to put a case, who wants to fly, what aircraft type they will bring in, but at the same time, what are the constituencies, what customer base will be benefited if they fly from Seattle to Haneda. Not to forget, a lot of airlines in US, they have their home bases, right, the big hubs. They can always circumvent and bring customers from there. But this way, they give a fair chance about looking at which airline will benefit if they fly to that area. So if, in case, if Delta says they want to fly Seattle to Haneda, and United says they want to fly Seattle to Haneda, or Alaska says they want to fly, they will ask Alaska, for example, so from there, what area you will cover easiest? And if Alaska says they can cover, being their hub, so many other cities and so much customers can benefit, then they will give an option to Delta or to United and say, what if you are bringing customers from your other hubs, rather than flying Seattle to Haneda, why don't you fly Chicago to Haneda or something like that? So it's a very good defined process. They look into it in a very clear way, it's open to public, and then only they allocate those frequencies. They also look at who is your partner in each country, right? So if United has a partner in codeshare partner or even a joint venture partner, and Alaska doesn't, they will look at it, it will go into the equation, whether it serves enough communities or not. But at the end of the day, just want to let you know, and to be very clear, it's the president that authorized the route. You can come up with anything else, it goes to the White House, and president is the last authority to say, yep, this is allocated, right? And it's a defined process too. It's written down. The president has the last authority to say yes or no to that route. But it's a good defined process, and we try to encourage a similar process in India. When we talk to Indian government, we try to say to them, we are getting into 4 or 5 different players in India.
Right.
Some of the markets, India has this bilateral which were done in 1960s, and they were written in a way where say each state, I tell you the exact language, each state can have one flight a day by one single carrier. So that means now if you have India, 1960 we only have probably one carrier, but now we have 4, but the bilateral only say only one can fly. Now, it's not possible if you have 4 carriers sitting here. And then the other country people will say, look, Singapore for example, we only have one carrier, Singapore Airlines. Now, sorry, this food is there. But earlier, Singapore had only one carrier, and India probably have that and 3 or 4 carriers, Jet, Kingfisher, Air India. And then, so Singapore would say, no, we can only allow one carrier too, but Singapore didn't do that, right? They said, no, let's open it up because they want to encourage more and more travelers. It's the consumer benefit, right? The customer's benefit. It helps. You earlier said the multiplier effect of bringing a wide-body plane into your city, it has a big economic benefit, right? Everybody knows about it. So let's fight for the economic benefit. Let the airlines fight for it, and let people like us have a good fares. Open Skies, just want to let you know, has reduced 30% of the fare on every country that they started signing up this bilateral agreement. 30% fare went down.
Right.
So it really helped the common people.
Definitely. So Abhijit, do you see yourself coming up against Air India and competing for rights under certain bilaterals?
Well, we compete for everything, right? So it's just the function of this market. So of course, we will compete with other airlines for infrastructure, and fundamentally, traffic rights is, at least I personally consider it to be soft infrastructure, right? That's just the nature of this business. Competition exists everywhere, it exists here. I think that India has a set of rules based on which allocation happens, but I think the principle in India is that first, traffic rights are there to be used. There's no point in just letting them lie around and be not used. So number one, whoever wants to use them should use them. Number two, if demand is greater than supply, then there's a set of rules that they follow to distribute traffic rights. You speak to any one of the participants in India, we will all have different opinions on whether those rules are good or bad. But that's probably got to do with our specific perspective. But in general, there are rules. Over a period of time, I'm sure those rules will evolve. And a lot of industry engagement with the government is about exactly what do you mean by aviation growth in India? How do you want to shape this going forward? What are the roles? What's the role of different enabling capabilities what roles do they have to play? Bilaterals, one of them, hard infrastructure is another. Learn from what other airlines have benefited from in India, and create the enable the right capabilities for us to be able to grow as an aviation ecosystem, and at the same time provide customers with greater choice. And it's important to recognize that all these sort of multiplicative benefits that come from growth of aviation, and there are several examples around the world about this, those multiplicative benefits are skewed towards the growth of local aviation ecosystems, right? Just any capacity does not drive multiplicative, GDP sort of drivers. It is local aviation industry that is more important for those to realize those multiplicative benefits. So I think that, this is a larger conversation, but at the very least there is a rule set. It's not just free for all, and that the government follows.
Right. Stephen, do you have these issues in Saudi at all? I mean, you're owned by basically Saudi.
Well, within the context, I totally agree with you in terms of reciprocity. We're one of the few countries in the Middle East that actually has a large domestic economy, right?
Yeah.
You don't find that in Bahrain, you don't find that in the UAE, Qatar, etc. So I believe when you talk about the Kingdom and India, there is reciprocity. So we have bilaterals. I think they're reasonably okay. I think both countries, it's in their interest to continue improving those bilaterals. And we have strong carriers on both ends of the spectrum, and so I'm quite positive about that. Now entering into the market is just another endorsement, I think, of the relationship between the two countries. In terms of the Kingdom, I did 8 years in Singapore, so I had to re-educate myself on bilaterals again, because you never had a problem in Singapore. It was always downwind somewhere like Korea or Japan or what have you. But I think the Kingdom is bordering on greater liberalisation. They're very much look at Singapore and say, well, what made it tick, what made the growth and everything. And so what I do see from Dhaka, our regulatory authority and so forth, and the government and what have you, is the more and more opening up of the Kingdom. They're very particularly keen in terms of regional development as well. I know you touched on that. Jeddah, Riyadh is their own beasts, and they do their own thing, but obviously opening up demand more, opening up other places, Medina, etc. So we are seeing that greater liberalism along the way. Will they go ultimately to open skies, free for all? I'm not too sure. But again, you mentioned we're part of the Saudi group, so that certainly helps because you've got quite an influential bloc, and we have 75% of the domestic market share. So from that perspective, we'll be going. But it hasn't been an obstacle at this time, and I mean, pleasantly surprised how India and Saudi Arabia are working together and us being able to enter the market as well.
Right. And I think if you look at the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia is really the one which the bilateral with India is in the best shape in the sense. I mean, Kuwait has recently been improved, increased, but obviously the others are sort of stuck at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I always remember when I was in actually Virgin Atlantic days, 2002, when I went off to GSA. Yeah. And it was that moment that I realised what was going on with Emirates and what have you. Less so because that was still up and coming. I met the DG of the Civil Aviation Authority in Pakistan for dinner, and he said, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And at that time in 2002, Emirates was already the largest carrier into and out of Pakistan.
Yes.
So over 23 years ago, and so again, I think bilaterals have been catching up. Realisation about what's been going on, making sure you are, to a certain degree, protecting your local carriers to get them, to strengthen them to a point. But then there becomes an inflection point where they are strong, India, Saudi Arabia. What do you do?
Yeah. The
bilaterals have been subsumed, so to speak, in terms of all our strength. So I think that's where we're at on a lot of occasions. I think we have a very strong carrier in Saudi now. We have ourselves, finance, which is 70 aircraft alone, and now BAA coming on board. I think that the policymakers in Saudi Arabia are certainly looking at that and going, what's the next step? Do we go as far as open skies or what? And I think that's a general debate we're all having at the moment.
Yeah, great. I want to spend a few minutes on China, which I mentioned a bit earlier, and which I think Peter was mentioned this morning. Only because it's a market which I'm personally very interested in, but I really think it's such a potential market for Indian carriers. When Indigo started flying to China back in 2019, I was there. We started the route Delhi-Chengdu, and I vividly remember that we put it on sale we were about 60 days, I think, 2 months before we had the first flight. And after about 3 weeks, somebody from revenue management came in my office and said, "I don't believe this. The Chengdu flight is already 55% full, and we still have 5 weeks to go." And I said, that's China. And China the whole China-India thing, because I've had feet in both camps. I've worked for Cathay Pacific for 20 years, so I sort of understand a little bit about China too. You know, they are crying out for more interaction, more service. At that time, the Chinese carriers operated, I think, 34 flights a week, the maximum bilateral, I think it was 34 or was that 34. India, before Indigo, operated 5. Air India operated 5 times a week to Shanghai. So I'm delighted that it's opened up again, obviously after 5 years pause for obvious reasons. And now Indigo's going back there. Calcutta, Guangzhou, and then Delhi, Guangzhou. But what's lying beyond that? And are the Chinese carriers going to come back to the same degree, you think?
Oh, I'm sure they will. And you know, both as a competitor and as a marketplace, you have to be prepared for that. Look, there are a lot of boxes this market ticks off, right? Very large populations, reasonably fast growth economies, geographically dispersed populations, which means that there is potential for multiple types of flying. There's a lot of tourism potential, a lot of business potential, trade potential. So there are a lot of boxes, macroeconomic boxes that this ticks to have the possibility for a very strong future, right? So, and I think that we are quite bullish about it, but keep in mind that there are also other characteristics in both these markets that will present their own challenges. They are a high volume, low yield set of markets on both sides, which means that it will always have, we have to be super efficient to be successful in these markets. You have to pace the amount of stimulation you want to drive, because that has its own economic challenges. There are a few hurdles that we still need to cross as an aviation market. Visas have their own journey to take to enable ease of access for large chunks of traffic. So I think that it's an important start. As Indigo, we are very excited about the future of this market. Effectively from day one, we have started with 2 frequencies.
Yeah.
And we're already evaluating possibilities of adding more. It's a great example of this sort of 6.5 hour radius story, right? Both from India and from China. So I think that with the right impetus, there is almost endless potential in this market. But there are things that need to fall in place for these things to work over a period of time.
Yeah.
But hey, we put our first foot in there, and we're quite excited about it.
Yeah. Sandy, you're a China expert. What do you think?
Thanks. So what Abhijit said, there are challenges. But out of all those challenges, if there's a market or there's a airline that can compete effectively with these mega Chinese carriers, that's Indigo. Because to beat China or to get those airlines to compete with them, you need to be very aggressive. You need to be fare conscious. And it's not easy, right? They are mega, they have huge population, big customer demand. I think we have the same in India. We have big customer demand. We have a very nimble, very cost-effective carrier. So there is this opportunity because the 2 mega countries, the most populated countries, most tourism-related activities, the heritage, what you call UNESCO heritage points in both countries are big. So just to give you an example, India has not allowed any Chinese visitors to come to India for the last 5 years, right? 70,000 visas were issued by China in first half of this year already to Indians. So last 5 years, a lot of Indians will continue to go. Some of the hotels I go to, they are, and I'm not talking the small hotels, there's no big OYOs there. So I'm talking Conrad or Ritz-Carlton and all. You go to their morning buffet area, you find a corner exclusively for Indian or vegan meals. In those, so you can imagine how much big numbers of Indians are going there. So there's the opportunity. Why? When Willie tell me that he was going to start this Chengdu flight, I was fantastic. It's a great destination to go to, and not to forget, there's a lot of shopping to be done. On the other way around, India hasn't done this incredible India yet into China. But if India able to do it, imagine the traffic between those two countries. It can just go berserk. We have seen that example of India and China and Japan.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking almost like 2-3 million on every quarter. Customers are going, right? And then India is just, whatever you know about China, there's a lot of Buddhism there, and we have a big Buddhist circuit here. They like to eat good food, and we got a lot of vegetarian food. But there are heritage points that they want to see. Indian culture is very much appreciated in China. Don't forget, they came here to Nalanda and learned a lot of things from us. So you will find it, and Indigo is actually in the right spot. Right? If Abhijit take me as an advisor, I will tell him, man, there are 7 cities you go every day, or some cities you go double daily. You will make it.
Yeah, right.
So China, but it's a difficult market. Okay.
Yeah.
Bilaterals are very tough. Both the countries don't open up that easily. Slots, Abhijit can probably doesn't get a Guangzhou slot yet. That's why Delhi flight is not announced yet. But
It's already selling.
you got it. I know Calcutta is done. It's a,
Delhi selling.
oh, good. And then what Campbell mentioned in the morning, they're planning Shanghai flight. The good thing for us right now, for India, if you want to know the crux of it, Chinese will come, definitely. Chinese carriers will come. Their main journey, when they were also coming earlier, you look at where the traffic was going. Only 50% was they were taking from India to China. The rest they were pushing it onto their networks. Going to Australia, going to New Zealand, going to US. Right now, they are not going to start too many flights into India. I can't see. When the announcement came, we were thinking all the Chinese carriers will be gung-ho to start into India immediately. You didn't see much of the energy coming. Only, I think China Eastern has said 3 times a week into India. They used to have almost double daily, one to Delhi and one to Kunming, Kolkata. And now they've just had 3 flights a week. So, because their other network that supports India flights is not ready yet. The US flights are basically very little. Their Canada flights are not doing very little. So we have a great opportunity to start getting Chinese onto our flights and to come and export. And to transfer them to Dubai from here rather than Emirates taking them. Good Dubai flight. Thank you.
Right, well, we're almost out of time. Maybe I'll just ask Stephen, Abhijit, Sandeep for a last comment about the policy environment. Any final thoughts?
For me, no, I think I've expressed that. I think that, again, I'm just looking at through the kingdom lens versus India and so forth. I think it's reasonably liberal. Improvements to be made over time, but I think we just share both, very large domestic markets that we can do that. So I think it's a positive sign, a positive progress. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks.
My view is that we have to recognize that policy is always a journey. It's not a fixed point that just stays the way that it is, right? And the policy journey kind of has to synchronize with the journey of evolution of the industry and the ecosystem itself. So there was a certain policy environment in the past that was reflective of the state of the industry in the past, and as we become bigger, bolder players in the aviation market globally, that policy environment will evolve with it, right? What is encouraging is that demand is not a problem, right? Right? Which is not what you can say about a lot of other parts of the world, right? it of course needs to be supported with the right cost structure, stimulated through the right cost structures, the right infrastructure. There's a lot of enabling things that need to happen, but if the demand wasn't there, then none of us, all the rest would not have been needed. So I think, we're quite, positive and optimistic about the future. Yeah.
Right, Sandy, you've got 10 seconds.
Okay. Policy, as we said, is shouldn't be written on a hard stone paper. It should be very agile. The bilaterals and all, once written in 1960s, doesn't make any sense today. Today's world is changing, and the way we are growing, our policy has to match that. What Abhijit is saying is exactly that what we are looking for. It's not only for India, it's also for the other countries, right? We want our tourists to go there and their tourists to come here. We just cannot put the restrictions, unnecessary restrictions, for not to allow them to come. As such, the policy melodrama that goes around today, you probably have seen, especially in our aviation sector, it's been looked into in a very good way, because ministries continue to change. Ministries keep on looking. I think NCAP 2.0 is going to come out. But again, the bilaterals and all should also become considered and taken for revision as the time and as India continues to grow.
Great, thanks, Sandy. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed the session. I certainly learned something, as I always do. So please do a big round of applause for our panel.